Hey y'all, welcome to the Coyote Trapping School Podcast. I'm your host Chris Pope, and today's episode, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know if this will be a full-blown episode or kind of a quick intermediate episode, but I just wanted to take a minute and talk. I've noticed that in the last couple months, the downloads for the podcast especially have really gone through the roof. They've increased significantly, and I assume that's folks. And I look back through, and it's folks listening to a lot of the older podcasts. I don't know if y'all are just finding Coyote Trapping School or what, but I appreciate y'all listening and listening. But so that kind of told me that there's a lot, some beginners and some folks just from looking at some of the subjects of the earlier podcasts. And so one thing I wanted to talk about. It's something that every trapper has an opinion on, and everybody has their own opinions, and some people can get pretty adamant about theirs. The best coyote trap, or the best predator trap. So everybody has got their own opinion. Some folks love long springs. I've never been a fan of long springs. Where I live, we got some pretty hard red clay, and I don't want to have to dig that much more of a trap bed. But, some folks swear by it, and, the holding power and all. I mean, there's in the different sizes, small traps, large traps, extra large traps, whatever. And I have people go around and around with me or get just some kind of worked up about some of my past videos when I talk about where to buy traps and what I recommend for traps. And so from the start, I'll say that what I recommend as the best coyote trap is whatever the heck trap that you have, as long as it's legal. In my state, we're limited. We can't set larger than a number 2 size trap on land. Some states you have to have rubber jaw traps, or some states, you can't use snares, or you can only use snares, or whatever. And like I said, everybody's got their own opinion. I am a big fan of. I'm a big fan of Minnesota brand traps, MB550s, because of our size restrictions. I've used the 650s a little bit in different states. When I went trapping last year in Ohio, that's what we used was the 650s. But I don't have enough experience with them to recommend yay or nay on them. But I've got pretty extensive experience with the MB550s, and I just think that's a jam-up trap. I am biased because that's what we're limited to, so far as size anyways. But that being said, the first coyote that I ever caught, I caught in a number 2 Duke. And I've recommended that when you buy your traps, you don't go to the hardware store, because all the hardware store carries is Duke traps. Place your order online, because you get a better deal if you're buying from a trapping supply place. A lot of times when you're buying by the half dozen or the dozen, depending on shipping, of course. But usually you're going to get a better deal there than going down to the hardware store, and you got more options than just buying Dukes. And I have folks that will argue with me, I'll trap circles around you with 24 Dukes, and you can have your 12 MB550s or whatever. You know what? That's fine. I'm not going to set Dukes. Because at some points you get into whether a trap needs a little bit of adjustment, a little bit of tweaking, or maybe needs is not the right word, but would work best if it had some adjustment, if it had some tweaking, if it had the dog filed, or had a night latch in it, or the ends turned up, or heavier chain, or this and that. And you can go down a rabbit hole and do all kinds of modifications to a trap. And then there's some traps that you can buy that they're fully modified, they're ready to go, and they may or may not still need a little bit of work. Like I said, if you've got traps that are legal and they have strong springs, and it's not some traps that have been rusting for 40 years, and you can open the jaws with your hands, the springs are so weak, but if you've got access to some traps that you've already got, and you're wondering, should I use these Dukes or should I buy some 550s or 650s or K9 Extremes or whatever, man, use the Dukes. Use whatever you got on hand, and just get after it. Get out there and start trapping. Start setting traps, because that's the best way that you're going to learn, is by actually doing, by putting those sets in. Just the practice of making the sets is going to be a big thing. And then as you go along, as you get more experience with other traps and try different traps, you're going to develop your own feel and your own opinion, just like every other trapper out there. But don't let trap preference or what's the word I'm looking for as a shoot, I can't think of the term, but it's kind of indecision when you got so many options. God, like, what is that phrase? I'm terrible about being able to think of the right phrase when I'm trying to think, but there are people that have so many options that they just don't wind up doing any of them. Don't let that happen to you. If you want to trap, get some traps and learn how they work, learn what makes them fire better, learn how you adjust the pan tension, how you if the swivels are good, if you need to replace the swivels, just get something and start learning, and then you're going to have time. Like I said, my first the traps that I started with, I bought at the hardware store, honest to goodness. And then once I got exposed to the Georgia Trappers Association, and I had some trappers kind of take me under their wing, show me what they used. That was before the MB550s were out, and a lot of the guys that I knew were using 1 3/4 Victors, fully modified, because they were trapping for the live market. 1 3/4 Victors, and so that's what I ordered, a dozen modified 1 3/4 Victors, and I still filed the dog down to a point, and I filed the pan down so that when it was set, it was just didn't have much option of moving, and it was ready to go. And I tinkered with those traps to get them to where I wanted them to be. I was in high school, and I had plenty of time after school or on the weekends or whatever to be messing around with traps. And to me at that time, that was an ideal thing to be doing. If I ain't hunting or trapping, I'd be doing something somehow related to it. And so that's what I was doing, was tinkering with traps. And I spent hours doing that, and I was perfectly content. But as you get older and get more responsibilities and get a family, you get less time to do things. And so at some point, for some of us, you have the decision of whether I spend time or spend money. And at this point, I'd rather spend a little bit more money so I can have a little bit more time to spend with my family. And so that's kind of the way I've gone and how I've done it. So one of the things that I also value is consistency in my traps, and that was something that for years, that was something that I always hoped to get to, but I didn't have what I felt like was my personal trap inventory. I didn't want to get rid of my 1 3/4 Victors and not have those couple dozen traps to set, as I was slowly starting to gain some more MB550s and my preferred traps. And so when you're setting traps, it does help, in my opinion. You kind of get into a groove when you're going through the trap line and you're going through your trapping season, and you've got a very consistent trap and trap bed that you just get into that groove where you can dig that trap bed, just fit that trap perfectly. And if you're switching back and forth between traps, definitely can be done. A lot of people do it, but for efficiency's sake, if you're switching back and forth between traps, it's going to slow you down a little bit, because, well, this is a number 2 bridger, so I got to dig the jaws out a little bit more, and it's going to slow you down a little bit, and that's depending on how many traps you've got and how much ground you're trying to cover. That may or may not be a big deal, but if you're trying to cover a good bit of ground and get more traps out, the more time you spend at a set is the less traps that you're going to get out down the line, which is ultimately going to impact how much your catch is. Which, if you're early starting out in the game trying to figure out what the best trap is, you're probably not worried about that to begin with. But like I said, that was just something that it's come up, and man, it's funny that I get some of the responses that I get, because I got a YouTube video that talks about the best coyote trap on the market, and I talk specifically about the MB550. I think that's a jam up trap. You read, excuse me, you read some like Clint Locklear's and O'Gorman's and some of their stuff, and they talk about having a big trap. Bigger is better. And O'Gorman is, he's pretty compelling in some of the pictures that he shows of coyotes caught by the forearm or by the elbow in those big traps, versus absolutely a small trap is not going to catch it. I've never caught a coyote in the MB550 by the forearm or by the elbow. Probably aren't going to, just because there's not enough room in those trap jaws to catch that coyote. So without a doubt, there's probably some potential there that a larger trap may be better, but I'm limited to what I can set. So everybody's going to have their own limitations, whether they're legal or personal or financial or whatever. So that's my overall. It's kind of a roundabout discussion, but that's my overall suggestion is, if you're on the verge of buying, if you want to get started trapping but you don't know where to start, just buy you some traps. Buy you some number 2 bridgers. That's a good starter trap. They're cheaper than the MB550s, and they'll get you started. And then get you a half dozen of those, get you a dozen of those, and then you can start adding from there. You can order a couple of, even just a couple of the MB550s and try them out, and see. I am a firm believer in quality. You get what you pay for, and if you pay a little bit more, you're usually going to get better quality, and I think that shows in the quality of the trap. But the one thing about traps is, it's a lifelong investment. I've got traps that I've been using for 10 years, and I intend to get another 10 years out of them, and then some. And I've got some traps around here that were my granddad's, and they're still able to catch game. So when you think about, that even if it's $20 a trap, you figure you're going to get at least 20 years out of that trap. If you stay trapping 20 years, that's $1 a year for that trap. $12 a year for a dozen traps. That starts to seem a lot more reasonable. Not even factoring in, if you're in areas like with this year, last year, and this year, what it looks like, the coyote markets like they are, one coyote in some of these good Midwestern states or sand hills, one good coyote can cover near about a dozen traps easy, a half a dozen for sure. You catch 2 good coyotes and you got your 2 dozen or a dozen really nice traps. You get into the south and some of the live market areas, those require a little bit better trap, at least a modified trap, but to make sure that you're not, you can move your game to the pins with no damage, and so there you're gonna pay right off the bat to get a little bit more modified trap at the very least, and then also. Geez, I just spaced out and lost where I was going with that. But then also, your catch is worth more alive than it is dead. So, selling, may take 3 or 4 of those coyotes depending on how much you're getting paid, but 2 to 4, and you could easily cover a dozen traps. So, that's just my 2 cents. I am definitely a fan of you get what you pay for, and more and more a fan of buying American-made things, even though it does cost more, and spending a little bit more to get a better quality piece of equipment that's going to last a long time. I know everybody's got their own resources and restrictions, and what they have available. If you only got $100 available, I would try to get as many traps as you can for that $100. And so I'm never criticizing anybody for what traps they use. As long as you're trapping and that's what you want to do and you're legal, hey, get after it. That's what it's all about, is getting out there and getting started and learning and getting better. So anyway, that's kind of a short one. Like I said, I don't know if I'll just kind of throw this out there as a midweek episode or a full-blown episode. I may add a little bit to it if something comes to me, but anyway, stay tuned for more, and y'all keep trapping, get after it. I know some of you are catching. Hopefully you catch some coyotes right now as we speak, and hope there's plenty more for you out there.